In our last episode, Sultan Mehmed V ascended the throne not as a ruler but as a relic, a gentle poet placed atop a dying empire. The Committee of Union and Progress ruled in his name, the army swore loyalty to their ideals, and the people, exhausted by tyranny, mistook the calm for change. This is road to destruction, the world wars. When the Young Turks restored the 1876 constitution, Istanbul erupted in celebration. For the first time in decades, the press was free. Political prisoners were released. Exiles returned from Paris, London, and Cairo carrying newspapers and manifestos, convinced the empire could yet be reborn. In cafes and lecture halls, men spoke of liberty, equality, and Ottoman brotherhood. The empire, it seemed, had been given another chance. Mehmed V watched from his palace balcony as crowds filled the streets below. His banners hung beside the flags of the committee. His portrait was carried beside that of Enver Pasha. For a moment, it seemed as if Sultan and people had been reconciled, the Caliph and the revolution walking hand in hand. But beneath the cheers, the fractures were already widening. The Committee of Union and Progress was no longer a secret society of idealists. It was an uneasy coalition of soldiers, bureaucrats, and intellectuals, bound together by ambition rather than unity. In Parliament, fiery liberals like Prince Sabahaddin demanded decentralization and minority rights, while hardliners in the CUP called for strong central rule under Turkish leadership. Armenians, Arabs, Greeks, and Jews sent deputies of their own, each demanding reform for their provinces. What had begun as a dream of Ottoman brotherhood quickly descended into a contest of grievances. To Mehmed, it was déjà vu. He had seen his brother Abdulhamid flirt with reform, only to smother it in fear. Now, in the name of liberty, the same disease was spreading again: suspicion, division, and the endless struggle for control. In April 1909, the illusion shattered. In Istanbul, mutinous soldiers and religious students rose up, demanding the restoration of Islamic law and the dismissal of the committee. They stormed Parliament, executed officers in the streets, and shouted, "Long live the Sharia!" Mehmed, trapped in Dolmabahce, could hear the gunfire echoing across the Bosphorus. It was the 31st March incident, the first counter-revolution of the new regime. For 11 tense days, the city teetered between anarchy and civil war. Then, from Salonika, the so-called Action Army, loyal to the CUP, marched on Istanbul. Led by Mahmud Şevket Pasha, they entered the capital, crushed the uprising, and hanged its ringleaders in the public square. The parliament reassembled, trembling, and declared reaction defeated. Liberty, they said, had triumphed again. But as under Abdulhamid, it was a liberty drenched in blood. The committee that had promised reform and liberty and freedom became the very thing they promised to replace. It ruled through fear as much as faith, banning opposition newspapers, censoring critics, and exiling liberal deputies. The same ideals that had overthrown Abdulhamid were now used to justify their own repression. It was as if the ghost of the Blood Sultan had never left, only traded the palace for the parliament. Mehmed saw all of the hypocrisy from the marble halls of Dolmabahce. He opened new sessions of parliament with trembling hands, his voice echoing through chambers filled with men who no longer looked at him. He signed decrees drafted by strangers, attended parades where soldiers saluted him by habit, not reverence. His seal legitimized the actions of others, the symbol of divine rule reduced to a bureaucratic formality. Beyond the capital, the empire echoed the CUP. It too was splitting apart. In the Balkans, Christian nationalists plotted independence. In Anatolia, Armenians whispered of autonomy. In Arabia, tribal unrest simmered. European consuls spoke of protecting minorities, a phrase that now sounded like the prelude to invasion. The same words had been uttered before the Crimean War, before the Bulgarian uprisings, before the Russo-Turkish War. The pattern had returned. And it only took the Italians striking first to start the feeding frenzy. Italy, the youngest of Europe's imperial powers, turned its gaze southward to Ottoman Libya, the provinces of Tripolitania and Cyrenaica. The Italians called them unclaimed lands, rich in coastline and prestige, and declared that they would bring civilization where the Sultan had brought only neglect. In truth, they sought empire, a colonial prize to rival France and Britain. In the autumn of 1911, Italian warships appeared off Tripoli. When the Ottomans protested, Italy simply declared war. The empire, already stretched thin from the Balkans to Yemen, had no means to defend its distant provinces. The small Ottoman garrisons fought bravely, aided by local tribes and a few young officers, men like Enver and Mustafa Kemal, who would one day shape the empire's final battles. But they fought with rifles against artillery, with courage against steel. For the first time in history, airplanes flew in combat, Italian pilots dropping small bombs on Ottoman positions in the desert. War had entered a new age, and the empire could not keep up. Ottoman reinforcements tried to reach Libya but were intercepted by the Italian navy. The Mediterranean, once an Ottoman sea, was now a cage. After a year of resistance, the empire sued for peace. The Treaty of Auchi, signed in October 1912, forced the Ottomans to cede Libya and the Dodecanese Islands. It was another amputation disguised as diplomacy, another province gone, another humiliation endured. But the blow did not end with Tripoli. Across the Balkans, the small Christian kingdoms had watched Italy's easy victory and drawn their own conclusion. The Ottoman Empire was finished. If Italy could seize a province across the sea, surely Serbia, Bulgaria, and Greece could take their own on land. Even before the ink dried on the treaty, their armies were already mobilizing. Inside Istanbul, the committee's unity unraveled completely. Enver dreamed of restoring the empire's glory through arms. Talat saw salvation in nationalism. Cemal, ever the pragmatist, believed in modernity at any cost. The liberals who had once preached freedom now whispered of dictatorship as the only path to survival. And Mehmed V, the caliph, the shadow of God, watched it all from behind his curtains. The constitution, the parliament, the promises of brotherhood, all of it had become a familiar play that continued over and over again. He was the actor who could not leave the stage, condemned to bless each new illusion of reform as the empire continued to dissolve before his eyes. He found quiet moments of peace where he could. Sometimes he would walk the corridors at night, stopping before the portraits of his ancestors. Warriors, conquerors, reformers. Mahmud, Abdulmajid, Abdulaziz, Abdulhamid. Each had fought to save the empire in their own way. Each had failed. He wondered if perhaps the throne itself had become a curse, that every generation of sultans was destined to inherit not power, but the duty to watch their inheritance burn again and again. By 1912, the illusion of unity was gone again. The constitution still existed, parliament still met, Mehmed still presided over ceremonies, but real power lay with the committee, divided, suspicious, and increasingly desperate. The reforms of 1909 had promised resurrection. Instead, they had delivered paralysis. And outside the palace, the storm clouds of war gathered again in the Balkans. Serbia, Bulgaria, Greece, and Montenegro saw Ottoman troops collapse against Italy and prepared for war. The Ottoman Empire, drained, divided, and led by committees, would soon face the reckoning it had feared for a century. In our next episode, the Balkan Wars, Collapse in Europe. 4 nations rise against the empire, 2 wars strip away its last European lands. The dream of reform ends in fire, and the Sultan's shadow grows shorter with each defeat. This is road to destruction, the world wars.